Good afternoon. And yes, Bill sued me. So did Jamie and Studley, two of my favorite people. And because they were fighting for kids. And I was a new superintendent, and the head of special education had a rotary dial phone on his desk. And we actually turned the department around quite a bit in that area with the help of a wonderful woman named Alice Parker. But I'm just here to say thank you for being here. Thank you for your commitment to the children of California. You see, I'm a native Californian. I was born in San Diego, California. My dad always said the hospital I was born in wasn't named until my birth, and the doctor took one look at me and said, "Mercy." But he was from back east. He was in the Navy, and he married my mother, a San Franciscan, and I've spent most of my life here in California. I was privileged to start to school here in San Francisco at a school named San Miguel. It was a public school, and I was one of 44 children in the second grade class. And then my dad got out of the Navy, and my parents bought their first home in San Carlos, California. And I went to Mrs. McClaus's class, and I was the 20th kid. And it made all the difference. Not that Mrs. Poole wasn't a good teacher in San Francisco with her 44 kids. She was doing a very good job. But 44 children, mostly blue-collar and working class, really, she couldn't get to everyone. And it was profoundly important to me that I was in this much quieter room with a teacher that really had the time to spend. And so I came by my interest in class size reduction, honestly. I will tell you, I think a lot of people are fond of saying that California is a bellwether for the nation. And if it is, we should worry. We should be very, very worried. I want to remind everybody that the fact is that we need a conversation about how we really build great schools again in California, not just in a few communities, but in every single solitary community in this state, at every school, in every classroom. And I want to just say to all of you that I think in reality, it is important that you go back and play a big role in your local school. But it's also important that you help to persuade the folks in Sacramento about what we need to be doing here. I can say this in front of Phil Ting because he is one of our warriors on behalf of children. But I will tell you, I had a shocking experience recently. I was at a lunch where I'm on the alumni board at UC Davis, where I was privileged to be an undergraduate years ago when the Buffalo roamed the plains. And we went to this lunch, and I was with one of the members of the legislature who is, in fact, very intelligent, college educated, went to UC Davis, really intelligent. And he was explaining to me how he had just given the schools, he and the legislature had just given us $6 billion more. And I hadn't said much through lunch. I said, well, that's $6 billion of the $13 billion that you owe us, that you took out of the coffers of schools, that you borrowed from the schools of California. And he said, well, Delaine, yes, that's true, but, you know, we're going to get the other 7 back, and you know, then we're going to try and do more. But you have to understand, I mean, you should understand this. You were in Sacramento. We have a lot of competing interests. We have to worry about water and transportation and police and fire. And I said, yes, but the Constitution of the state of California doesn't say that you need to balance all those competing interests. The Constitution of the state of California says the first priority shall be the education of children through college. And he said to me, does it really say that? He took an oath to uphold a document he's not familiar with, apparently. And that's why it's important for all of you to be familiar with that. Look, I grew up in this state in the 50s and 60s, at a time when California was not rich. But in fact, they did invest in their children's education. We were 5th of the 50 states in per pupil spending when I graduated from high school. And while we're 37th, if you adjust for the cost of living, we're nearly at the bottom. Because California is an expensive place. I don't know, you been to Mississippi? I can spell Mississippi. That's M-I, crooked letter, I, crooked letter, I, humpback, I. Mississippi is not known for its great schools, but it's also very inexpensive to live there. For us to be down spending per pupil what Mississippi is spending is a disgrace to California. It's a disgrace to the history of our state. Look, my family came out of, whether it was in Kentucky or in California, my family went through the terrible Depression, and they went through the Second World War, and yet somehow they figured out how to build 9 of the 10 UC campuses were built and open when I left to go to UC in 1965. All but 3 of the California State University campuses were built and opened when I left to go to college, and all but 2 of the main campuses of the community college system were built and opened by 1965. Nelson Rockefeller got on a jet and flew to California to look and see at this wonderful new idea called the community college, and he went back to New York as governor and copied it. California was at the very leading edge of public policy when it came to education, and it changed the lives of so many people. Many of you had parents who, frankly, many of your parents my age, but the truth is, I no longer said we all remember where we were when Kennedy was shot. Several of my staff said I wasn't born yet, so I stopped doing that. But one of my favorite Kennedy stories is he called for us to go to the moon by the end of this decade of the 60s. And now we think, well, we did it, we did it. But if you were around then, you'd know that not everybody thought it was such a good idea. They said, oh, Mr. President, this is too ambitious a schedule. Oh, Mr. President, this is too expensive. Oh, Mr. President, this is too hard. And Kennedy said, we go to the moon not because it is easy, but because it is hard. I am not telling you that rebuilding the schools of this state will be easy. It will be hard. But we need to begin to treat the budget of the state of California the way you treat your family budget. The children need to come first. Some of you know my story. I got accepted at UC Davis in 1965, and at that time, girls couldn't borrow money until they were 21. Boys could borrow at 18. But the National Defense Education Act didn't allow women to borrow until they were 21, and they put women in the Civil Rights Act because they thought it might kill it. So let me just say that when I turned 18 and was accepted at Davis, my parents had to borrow the money at a full 7.5% interest, not at the 4% the students could borrow, and they had to pay it back right away. So by the time I was 21 and could borrow the money, which was the year the Civil Rights Act passed, my parents' loan was twice their house payment. But see, budgets were statement of values in our house. That's what they are in your house. If you wanted a brand new, beautiful car and you just thought it was gorgeous, but you wanted to send your child to college, you would, of course, send your child to college. Budgets are statements of values. And right now, if you looked at the budget of the state of California, you'd think our priority was prisons. They're doing a lot of things right now that really don't make a lot of sense. And let me just say this. I actually think it would be great someday to have a high-speed rail. There, I said it. But I voted no on it because there was no money put aside through a tax on gas or through some other means to pay for it. When you borrow money to build, whether it's high-speed rail or a water project or anything else, when you borrow the money, it costs 3 or 4 times what it says on the price tag. How many of you have bought your cars on credit cards? You wouldn't do that. You're too smart. If you did it, just keep your hand down. You wouldn't do that because you're too smart. But when California does things like water bonds and does it on long-term general obligation debt, it costs 3 or 4 times as much money. And oh, by the way, you haven't voted on a prison bond lately, but they're still building prisons. You know why? This is one of the great disgraces of California. The voters turned down 2 of the prison bonds, so they stopped asking you. Oh, they say they don't have to because they're going to do a revenue bond. You know what the source of revenue identified by the legislature is? The general fund of the state of California. And yet we couldn't figure out how to do a school bond to build new schools and to repair old schools and to build new college campuses. And that's just wrong. I will tell you that, by the way, the last water plan that was done in California was done by Governor Brown. That would be Pat Brown in 1957. We are not doing long-range planning. We are not thinking down the road. We're kind of catch as catch can. And that's why you come up with kind of haphazard propositions like Proposition 2. And I am so proud of Educate Our State for standing up and saying vote no on 2. It is not well conceived. in the end, I just got to tell you, I find us sort of feckless right now. You know, I look around my country and I see in Florida and in Georgia and in Oklahoma, they're working on universal preschool. Yes, in Illinois and in New York, we would expect that. But Oklahoma? Because they understand something that most of you in this room know, that the steepest curve of learning is 0 to 5. That, in fact, for many of these children, whatever we come back to do later, in terms of adjustments and corrections and additional education, it's too late. The truth is, according to the famous report that came out of the National Research Council, from the time of conception to the first day of kindergarten, development proceeds at a pace exceeding any other stage of life. Jerry Brown said he got kicked out of preschool and it didn't hurt him. Well, I have two answers to that. First, I do think it hurt him. And second, the reality is he is from a very well-educated, affluent family. He gets the least value from preschool. The kids who really need it the most are the single-parent families and the parents who are poor or who don't speak English. We ought to be having a serious conversation in this state about how we improve preschool. We had first 5 passed, and it was, thank God for Rob Reiner. The tobacco industry put $42 million to defeat a tobacco tax to help 0 to 5 development. And we won. I was the honorary co-chair of the campaign. It's not perfect, but it's good. And the reality is, when Arnold Schwarzenegger stole money from the state through his triple flip on the vehicle license fee, and you know, many of you, how this works. I'm not going to go into detail, but what I will tell you is he reduced vehicle license fees. I mean, I guess if I had 5 brand new Hummers in the garage, I'd want to reduce vehicle license fees. On the other hand, if I could afford 5 Hummers, I could probably afford the vehicle license fee on all 5 of them. But I digress. The reality is that starting there, we have been steadily reducing the money that is owed to the schools of the state of California. They are being used like a piggy bank, and you are seeing your property tax stolen at the very time when more than ever we should be able to use that money to rebuild the schools of this state. I live in Davis. We aren't a basic aid district. We have 4 parcel taxes on our houses. One of my neighbors said, Delaine, why are you for this? I mean, I got kids, I'm for it, but I don't get why you're for it. You're doing the kickoff at your house. Are you nuts? And I said, well, you know what? I just like living in a town where people care about their children. I like living in a community where people put children first. It makes for better neighbors. And oh, by the way, it's the best way to keep your property values high is to live in a community that has good schools. End of the day, I'll just tell you, I believe that we ought to be having a conversation about universal preschool, about reducing class size back to where it was 20 to 1 K3, and then we ought to have 24 to 1 in 4th grade and 25 to 1 in 5th grade and 26 to 1 is the maximum in 6th grade. We ought to be having a conversation about how we bring the arts back to our schools. 25% of the jobs in the new economy are arts-based. We ought to be having a conversation. You shouldn't just have a foundation to do that. That ought to be part of the curriculum. George W. Bush had no child left untested, no child left behind. And in the end, you know, he said we were only going to assess achievement in history and in science in 2 grades. And guess what? I've been in schools all over the state where history and science are only taught in the 2 grades where it's tested. The superintendent of schools up in Placer County, her son was advanced in math and he was advanced in English language arts, but he was just so-so. He was just proficient in science. So she goes down and says to the principal, why is my son only proficient in science? And the teacher said, well, there were a bunch of 4th grade science standards, and we actually don't teach science in the 4th grade because they're not tested in the 4th grade. So next year we're going to ask the 4th grade teachers to teach some science because we've just been focusing on English and math. Is that the kind of state you want to live in? Where we got rid of physical education and we got rid of civic engagement, we got rid of the arts? For heaven's sakes, we want to educate the whole child. Of course there should be gardens in schools. Of course there should be nutritious lunches. Of course we should engage and involve kids in career and technical education. Because I'll tell you, you save that one, with art, and that one with music, and that one with math, and that one with science. These children are not McDonald's Happy Meals. They're individuals, and we have to get to them different ways to excite them about this activity which we call learning. And I've seen it. I'll tell you, I've seen schools throughout the state and around the world, actually, from preschool to graduate school, where kids are doing powerful learning by being engaged and involved in something like service. The truth is, I've seen students tutoring younger students and peers, and I've met students nurturing school gardens and community gardens, and I've been to the places where the industrial arts students were engaged in building a house for a teacher in a rural, remote school district. The important point is empowering these kids. Remember, great civilizations inspire great personal achievement and great social responsibility. Great civilizations arise from the imagination and hard work of people who are nurtured by their societies to develop their gifts. In a word, education. Education, the place where personal and social responsibility come together for personal and social greatness, both together. In a great civilization, cities, counties, and schools are the institutional incubators of human potential in every sense of the word. Our job is to create those institutional incubators of human potential across the state of California. Journalist Richard Cohen once observed, "Those with nothing to gain have nothing to lose." The poet Nietzsche was more eloquent when he said, "He who has a why to live can bear with almost any how." That was what Viktor Frankl quoted when he was asked how he survived the Holocaust. He who has a why to live can bear with almost any how. So yes, I was the architect of the first net day, and I believe in technology in the schools. I believe we need to modernize them. We brought not just Al Gore, but Bill Clinton and the entire cabinet to California. We had 30,000 volunteers in the street. But at the end of the day, we need technology, yes, but it's just a tool. What we need are great teachers who feel supported, great principals and other leaders who feel that they are really in charge of an important enterprise. And most of all, we need children that really feel like we care about them and that we're giving them a why. You can talk about test scores, and you can talk about tenure, and you can talk about class size reduction till you're blue in the face. But none of it will matter if our children are not protected, if they don't feel safe in schools. So to be 50th in counselors, 50th in nurses, 50th in psychologists, 50th in class size, dead last in terms of the number of adults who are at our schools. We need more grown-ups to help these little kids to grow up. And that's our job. I'll say one other thing. I think these counselors are very important because, and some of you have heard me say this before, but I'm going to repeat myself. Some children are from dysfunctional families. Now, I won't embarrass you by asking if you are from a dysfunctional family. I know that if you are not, you married someone from a dysfunctional family. Or your best friend was from a dysfunctional family. Me, I'm a triple dipper. And I got here because of some great teachers, some great counselors, an amazing father, a couple of wonderful aunts, Girl Scout leader that was second to none, and really and truly a fabulous education. I want everybody here to know that there's been a lot of research done on resilience. Do you know that over 70% of the kids from dysfunctional families become functional adults? You know what they've got in common? Well, first, they need the protective factors of caring relationships, high expectations, and opportunities to participate and contribute. Second, we need to remember that studies tell us that these programs per se are not the answer. Bonnie Bernard from West Ed writes, "No program design can compensate for a mentor that is not caring, respectful, and reciprocal." We need to make sure that we have these mentors. Third, Bonnie Bernard also says resilience research confirms unequivocally the power of one person to make a difference. But Dr. Bernard goes on to say, quote, "Finally, while the power of one is real, it is not always enough. Furthermore, the power of more than one, of two or several, or many, is much more than additive, it is exponential. We must work together to weave a fabric of resilience that connects not just young peoples to their families, schools, and communities, but one that connects families to schools and communities to each other. So we need to be about getting cities involved with the school districts to work on things like attendance, getting cities involved with school districts to make sure that we, in fact, are providing collaborative arrangements. In the end, Archimedes, one of my favorite quotes, Archimedes, the great Greek writer, had designed this new tool, this tool called a lever. And someone asked Archimedes, just how powerful is this new tool, this tool called a lever? He thought for a minute, and he said, I'll tell you how powerful it is. You give me a lever and a fulcrum and a place to stand, and I will move the world. That's what education has been for California. That's what it's been for America. The question is, will we have the courage of our ancestors? A friend of mine who was vice president of IBM sent me an article in the Kiplinger newsletter a couple of years ago, said, beware the BRICS. You know the BRICS? Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. These are serious people, and they're educating their kids to a fare thee well right now, and they learned it from us. Just last week, Germany announced that any child from any country that was accepted at one of their colleges, they would pay their full tuition. This is a world that's woken up to education just as we are falling asleep. And I will tell you, I think it's really important that this group find its voice and fight back to restore, yes, the days of the calendar. We shouldn't just be at 175 days. I got us to 180. We went, a lot of districts are back to 175. Do you know there are 200 days a year in Europe? 220 to 260 days a year in Asia? The truth is that we are asking kids to learn more and more. The information is doubling in this country every 2 or 3 years, and yet our school year is short. The reality is we need to figure out what we're going to do to give these kids an opportunity. I will just tell you, we're at a crossroads where a lot of people with a straight face are saying it's more important to keep taxes low in lieu of preschools or longer school years or building great colleges or class size. The fact is we've spent a lot rebuilding schools in other countries. We need to invest at home. I will just say to you, I may have used this quote before, forgive me, but it's striking to me that in 1953, Dwight David Eisenhower said, every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who are hungry and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. This world in arms isn't spending money alone. It is spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, and the hopes of its children. We must waken this state and our nation to the importance of great education for all of our kids. And we must, in fact, remember that these children have so much potential. They can leap great barriers in a single bound. They have imagination. Children can see through anything they see with their hearts. Children move mountains the old-fashioned way. They have faith. Over the years of visiting schools in all 58 counties and in several states and nations, I had an awakening. At first, it may seem like a semantic distinction, but for me, it's really important. When you look in the eyes of a child, we often say we see the face of hope. I now realize that it's something much more important. You see the face of optimism. There's a difference. We hope with our fingers crossed. Optimism is that hand waving in the back of the classroom. Optimism is running to the library. Optimism is trying again and again at the language lab, the computer lab, or the basketball hoop. Optimism is a homeless girl waiting in the tide pools of San Diego, dreaming of being a marine biologist. I met her. I believe she can be a marine biologist. But it's really up to us whether that happens or not. So America is not just in need of hope. The beautiful possibility is obvious. America is in need of a good case of optimism. California is in need of a good case of optimism. And ladies and gentlemen, you get it from children. Thank you all very much.